after a couple years, you were able to, through the success, move into a larger location, famously above the bagel store. So, how did you find that location, and what made it work for you before you got there?
Well, New York real estate back then was really interesting. I don't think it wasn't as corporate as it is now. So the bagel buffet just seemed like the location was good because of the subway stop. The subway stations right there. West 4th Street subway stop was right there, and you had a lot of different lines that came there. So I was like, it's a good location. You also had the Metro North line from New Jersey that stopped on 6th Avenue, which was just half a block away. So getting there was very easy. And if anybody knows New York City, especially in those days, like driving is very difficult. Parking is horrendous
and very expensive.
yeah, I know. So I always thought about that. The first store wasn't that close to that many subways. It was 9th Street. There was a couple of subway stations, but you had to walk a few blocks. Whereas this location now, they had maybe 4 different subway lines and the Metro North, or New Jersey Path right there. So it was perfect. And the guy who owned the building, he was really old school. Like my first lease was just like a handwritten paper that he wrote to me. And he had some issues with the tenant before me. So he was happy that he was getting like a legitimate business. Again, we took, everything is taking a chance. But that was the Village, the West Village. It was still a very popular place. A lot of people hung out there. You had like the motorcycle crews would come down and hang out down. It was just a happening spot. Whenever people came from anywhere, they went down to West 4th, from all different parts of the metropolitan area. So we just happened to be there. I couldn't afford a ground level store. And so I got the bagel buffet, which was upstairs, and it worked out.
Well, there you go. And then famously, Kanye West was at the opening of this, but also Al Tariq, Lord Finesse, Chino XL, and others. So what was happening at this time to where you were able to attract such big underground talent to do this grand opening?
Well, it was because of what was happening in the first store. So on 9th Street. So when I opened up on 9th Street, and anybody that's in hip hop, you already know, if you come, at least in those days, if you came anywhere, if you went to the corner, people were hanging out, you'd be like, yo, I'm an MC. Oh, okay. Let me hear you spit. Yeah, it's automatic. So it was the same thing when you came down to Fat Beats. A lot of times, I own the business, but I'm also a sales guy. So I have to talk to people. And so I would talk to people, and find out they're an MC. Oh, you're an MC? Want to get on real quick. And that just snowballed. So now, you walk in there and like someone's rapping and you're like, yo, who's this guy? He's like, he's not signed, this guy, so it just became like a thing where, like I said, people would come to the store just to hang out to see what would happen. I was the same way with DJs. DJs would come in, and you always can tell a DJ because I'm trying to go in. I'm from like the battle era. I'm trying to go in. So I see people come in, I'm trying to show off. And then you can always tell the DJ from the way he's looking. So I start talking, before you know it, they get on. So now he's on. So he tells his friends and the other people come. And so a lot of celebrities would come through, because especially those first few weeks that I opened, was during, like I said, New Music Seminar and the Rocksteady battle. And so I didn't know the DJs as much, but I knew, I knew of them. So when I would see a DJ, I was like, oh, wow, that's Q-Bert. I know he's from, he's out here, and he would be down. He came down, I think, with Mike, Mixmaster Mike, and maybe Shortcut. I think DJ Apollo also. And mind, the scene is just starting, so no one is as famous as they are now. And they had no problem getting on, so they would get on. Someone else would come in and be like, yo, can I get on? You can get on too. Just don't break my needles. And So it became like it was almost like an open turntable set. And like I said, because people liked the way it looked, the feel and everything. So other people would come. I mean, Cash Money would come down and say, yo, Cash, you gotta get on, and he would get on, and then it just happened. And it was weird because like people would just come in when certain people were DJing, like other famous DJs would come in. So it just became like a thing. So when we went to open up on the 6th Avenue store, it was just an automatic. It was like, hey, we're just gonna have an open mic. We have a bunch of DJs, and I forgot how we got the word out, but we got the word out to everybody, and just all these MCs started coming through.
Well, speaking of DJs, DJ Eclipse, of course, was one of the main employees there early in the game, and you had a lot of other artists, Ill Bill and others that worked there. Having artists working there, I could see that being a really good thing, as it seemed it was, but I could also see that being a really bad thing if they're like saying somebody's whack to the wrong person or something, or a record they don't like or what have you. So how did you kind of balance the I guess the machismo of what rap is and what rap represents, especially the underground scene, versus picking the people to work in the store that you knew were super knowledgeable about what was happening?
Well, Eclipse is very knowledgeable. He like seemed to know every record, and he was at Wild Pitch at the time. So he was working at Wild Pitch, and he used to come work Wild Pitch Records. And at the time, he was working Ultramagnetic. He had a Large Professor and O.C. and he had some of these Wild Pitch classics. They were working that project. And it wasn't Large Professor, it was Main Source, actually, the Main Source. So obviously those were big records that we loved. The store would sell real good. And I think Wild Pitch was closing at the time. They were going through some changes. So Eclipse started working at the store part-time on the weekends. And also, I felt it was time to bring in more employees because I was basically working every day. I hired my man, Ryan Sicko, who was my neighbor upstairs, who started working with me from day one. But, it was just us two. And then we started bringing in some part-timers, and Eclipse was one of them. And then just people in the scene, we're just looking for some work. So DJs would look for some part-time work. I had Mr. Sinister work in the store for a while. And, I was very involved. Like I said, I was very involved with B-Boys, and I was part of a play called Gem on the Groove. It was, at the time it was called Get Original. And there was B-Boys in there, and a B-girl, Rockefeller, who was part of it. And she was looking for some part-time work. So I hired her. And it was just the people I was around. So that's why, we had B-Boys and DJs and then MCs. It's funny, I hired Q Unique. He worked in the store for a while, from Arsonist, Rocksteady Crew. Now he's like a big metal guy. He's in this group Stillwell and stuff. And I met him at Irving Plaza. Like I was battling him in a B-Boy battle, and he came to the store. This was during the Rocksteady reunion. He came down to the store and we recognized each other. We started talking, and eventually I hired him. And Ill Bill, I think, eventually he was working in the store too. And he was just hired from Eclipse.
Okay.
So it added, definitely artists, people would come down to see them, see some of the artists. And most of the time the artists were good with the records and pushing them and wasn't discriminating against any of the other artists or genres.
Okay. And with records, of course, a lot of things that drive records at this time, and still, at least to some degree, is getting airplay. And I know that from reading back in the day and knowing the New York scene and all this other stuff that's stretching Bobbito's show, of course, you guys had a relationship with them, and it seemed like it was beneficial. They would play records that would help you sell records, but then also, having a store kind of helped them, I guess, with the outlet in a sense for some of their own things that you sold. So how and why do you think that relationship developed the way that it did early in the Fat Beats business?
But when I came in '94, the scene was there, but no one was thinking independent. So everyone was trying to get signed. So that was their goal. So you would press up records, try to give them the DJs, pay DJs to put them on mixtapes, and try to get the industry to recognize, your project. And some of the industry was changing. Not everyone. First of all, not every album was as good as like Nas Illmatic, and
you don't say.
yeah. And so, you want to be optimistic, but like a lot of stuff, I'm like, I don't think a major label is going to pick this stuff up. It's just it has a crowd for it, but they're looking for a big sound. So we would, I would take records in, and I'm like, hey, how many did you press? Because they would press like 500 usually. That was kind of the minimum to get the first price break. And they're trying to give them out to all the DJs. They're mailing them, spending all this money trying to get some recognition. And I open up, and obviously they would give stuff to Stretch and Bob, and I would stay up really late at night, record the shows all the time, and then try to hit up Bob about what records those were. So he started telling me, and then he was in the industry too. Bob worked at Def Jam. He worked at a bunch of labels, so he knew what these artists were doing. So he would say, "Hey, just bring some records down to Fat Beats to see if they could sell them." So his shout outs, Stretch and Bob shout outs were priceless. Those were like amazing marketing. But at the time, we weren't thinking of like that. We were thinking like, hey, I'm gonna play the record, or shout out the record store so people can go buy this guy's record that I'm playing because I like the music. And that worked. So I'd call them up all the time. Most of the time they give me a hard time, about what the records were. But eventually they would like let me know, because they were trying to look out for the scene too. Because like I said, there was no money. There was no money in the scene. So when I came in, I think we showed people like, hey, you don't need a major label or even independent label, because all the independents in those days were attached to majors. You had very, very few. You had like Paul Winley, what's his name? Peter Brown. Certain people in New York were coming around with independent records that they were pressing. Showbiz and AG, Showbiz presses records, and he sold them. But there wasn't a lot of people that did that. Most people were just trying to get signed. So we opened up a door and said, hey, put the records here. And then when you came in the store, we had nothing against major label artists. The only thing was that we didn't need to play Redman. I didn't need to play, Biggie or Wu-Tang or Nas or AZ at the time. Those were already known. It was the independents that people didn't know. The labels that weren't on had major distribution or something. So we'd play those all the time. And one of the first ones that we were pushing a lot was Company Flow, Funk Crusher EP. And I thought it was really cool because he was like, it was like a clear blue vinyl. And no one was really doing colorways in those days. And the music was just really good. And I was like, you'll catch some of these on Stretch and Bob and also on Martin Moore and Mayhem, other radio shows. But if you weren't from New York, or if you didn't listen to the radio shows, you came down in the store, we were playing the same thing.
Yeah. And one of the first ones I remember seeing Fat Beats labeled on it was the Nonfiction Legacy record.
Yeah.
And that was done with Searchlight as well. So how and why was that something, obviously Ill Bill, but how and why did you decide to say, you know what, let's actually get into this a little bit deeper and explore this a different avenue of the business?
Well, at that time I had met Rich King, and Rich King was working at Big Daddy Distribution. So he was actually doing distribution for some of these projects. He was doing the same thing I was doing, except I was doing it on the retail end and he was doing it for distribution. And so he was actually picking up records and hitting up the artists, the same artists that Stretch and Bob were playing, that I was calling up and saying, I can distribute this. So he, I got wind of him. I started ordering records from him. He would bring it up himself. He would come down because he was amazed, because he was like, you're the only store in New York that's buying this stuff, the independent stuff. And so I was talking to him, how do you sell this? Where does it go? And he would tell me he had an account, Mr. Bongo in the UK. He had a couple of accounts in Japan, Manhattan Records. One of them was one of them, and a few other DMR. And he was like, there's only a few people that take these, and then you take them here in New York. And things were just bubbling. Things started happening more and more. I was a big fan of the X-Men DJs, now known as the Executioners. So I would go around and go to their competitions or go to their showcases, wherever they were playing. I would videotape them and just really got into them. And I was just like, man, I got to put some of this on wax. These DJs are amazing. So at the time, they were all incredible, but Rob Swift seemed to have the more musical sort of sets. So I stepped to Rob, and he used to do this set with Public Enemy #1, with the beginning of it. And he would use the tone arm and have the tone go high and back and forth, and he would flip the beat with the other hand and get everyone in nodding. So I was like, we got to make a record. So I stepped to Rob, and at the time, my friend Randy, who was the one that started 88 Hip Hop, he was working with this group called the Cracker Jacks, and he was doing some independent stuff. And he had put out a record with a group called the Puppets of Chaos. So he kind of put me up on it. And when I stepped to Rob was like, yeah, I'm down. Had a very small budget to do it. And I was just looking for some MCs. Cracker Jacks were on the Leaders of the New School record. They had a posse cut. Damn, I'm trying to remember the name of that cut. Syndrome or something, but it was a posse cut and had all these MCs on them. And they were on it too. And we just had access to them. So I hooked them up. We went to Power Play Studios in Long Island City in Queens. And just Rob was, he was the one doing the beat. They came in, did their stuff. And I was like, hey, the first 12-inch. And so that came. And then when Eclipse started working at the store, Ill Bill did some solo stuff. He had a record on a Southpaw label called Southpaw. So it was an Ill Bill record. And I remember we got it and I was like, this is really good. And Eclipse happened to just know Search, and that's when they had formed Nonfiction. So he saw that I put out the first record independently, and he saw that we were selling a ton of records independently. So he's like, hey, we're trying to do this record. So I was like, hey, let's hook up. So they recorded it and everything. So yeah, we put it together and put that, the first Nonfiction 12-inch out.
Now I want you to listen real close to me. I'm going to ask you some real simple questions, and I want some real simple answers. Do you understand?
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yes, I understand.
You said that you couldn't have possibly been at the crime scene at 11:15 because you were in the bookstore buying my audio book and my hardcover book at 11:15 when the crime scene occurred in Soren's book.
The history of gangster rap.
So you couldn't have been at the crime scene because you were buying the books.
Right. At 11:15, I was at the bookstore at 11:15, and when I bought the books and accidentally left them at the store.
So at 11:15, you couldn't have been at the crime scene because you were buying books, right?
At 11:15, when I was leaving, it was some people coming in, and I forgot to grab.
But you don't remember who
what they look
people,
like.
what they look like or nothing, right?
No.
So 12:15, you in the bookstore buying my audio book and hardcover book and Soren's book at 12:15, so you couldn't have been at the scene because you were buying the books, right?
Yeah, at 12, exactly, at 12:15 exactly, I was at the bookstore.
Now you see. You know you done fucked up.
Which you
So
mean?
first you said you were at the bookstore at 11:15, and then you said it was 12:15. You know you done fucked up, man. He fucked up.
Yeah, he fucked up.
He fucked up.
Man, you confusing me, man.
So, you get my book, my audio book, 40 years, and Soren's book, History of Gangster Rap, and if you don't, you know you done fucked up, right?
Man, the more those cops ask me questions, the more I wish I bought them motherfucking books.